Good morning, it's Richard Edelman from New York, and I'm here today to unveil the results of the 2022 Edelman Trust Barometer. Following my presentation, we'll have Gillian Tett of the Financial Times and a panel of global experts, CEOs, and government officials to discuss the findings. So I'm going to go straight to it. We started the Trust Barometer after the battle in Seattle in 1999. We wanted to understand the impact of NGOs on global society and found, in fact, that NGOs were the most trusted institution in global society. So that is not today the finding. In fact, in our study, which we've done in 28 countries during the early part of November, with 36,000 respondents, we find, in fact, a big change. So moving on to 22 years of trust. Among the most important findings over that period of time, NGOs were the most trusted institution for 19 years. We found post the financial crisis that business trust collapsed. It was followed, in fact, by a decline in government trust due to the impasse in Brussels on Greek debt, the blockade in DC over the spending limits, and what we now find is a cycle of distrust, especially between the media and government. So here we go. We believe that we are in a new low level of distrust in the world, that in fact, business is the sole trusted institution. NGOs close, but contrast that to May 2020, only 18 months ago, where government was the most trusted institution in the world. It was the only one big enough to manage a crisis of the size of the pandemic. And government, in short, has failed that test. In short, media and government today are seen as divisive. They are locked in a cycle of distrust. By contrast, both business and NGOs are seen as unifying forces in society. News sources have failed to fix their problem of trust. We see this as an airplane slowly losing altitude. It's not a crisis, it's not plunging yet, but social media is at a crisis point in Western Europe. Traditional media is at a crisis point in parts of Asia, in particular in Japan and Korea, and also in the United States. Fake news is the core problem. This is a universal dilemma for news organizations, and the extent to which social media has polluted the bloodstream is evident by this concern about fake news. People want government to lead on societal problems, but the crisis is in government because it doesn't get results. Note that only 42% of people believe that government can execute plans. 44% believe that government can execute on a leadership basis across institutions. You'll see also that the result of this is that institutions are perceived as having failed in the two biggest challenges of our time, which is the pandemic and climate change, across the board. So we have big problems and an inability of institutions to solve them. At the same time, societal fears are on the rise. How can you run fast forward if in fact you're looking behind yourself? 85% of people are worried about job loss because of the pandemic or because of automation, followed by climate change, cyber hacks, losing freedoms, and racism. We also, though, see a cycle of distrust. Let me try to explain this model. In fact, we have a government that is sowing division because it leads to votes. Media, unfortunately, follows with information that suits polarities, and it's causing societal instability between division and disinformation. What we have to do is find a way to break this cycle with quality information. The failure of leadership is evident. It is making the problems worse. Distrust is now the default sentiment in the world. Take a look. Only 42% trust government leaders, 46% journalists, 49% CEOs. Who do they trust? Scientists, co-workers, and interestingly, my CEO, a theme that we've discussed in the past, which is trust is local, in my company, in my coworkers. Therefore, big obligations onto CEOs to speak up. This slide is stunning. 2/3 believe they're being lied to by our traditional leaders, whether journalists, government, or business leaders, purposely trying to mislead us in order to get popularity or to get clicks. The mass class divide became evident first in 2012. It was about a 4-year lag time from the Great Recession. But what's happened is it's become transversal. It's become across the world. Note that between the top 25% of income and the bottom 25% of income, you see big divides in countries as diverse as Thailand, Saudi Arabia, the UK, Germany, Holland. So in short, Western democracies, monarchies, Asian success stories, in short, mass class divide transversal. The politics of the world are getting more distrusting. What you see is a collapse of trust among Republicans in institutions in the United States, especially in business. For the first time, Republicans trust business less than Democrats. That is a shocking finding. In short, Republicans believe that business has gone too far, that CEOs are woke, that in short, the job is shareholders. It's not a broader societal context. But also in media, 24% trust in media among Republicans. That is effectively a signing off of media. Trust has become local. Less trust for outsiders, closer bonds with neighbors and coworkers. Again, to the thesis, my CEO, my company, my community. More nationalism, more provincialism. Distrust is now the default in society. I distrust unless I see evidence. I also believe that our society lacks the ability to have a constructive dialogue. We can't have civil discourse. This is corrosive for democracy. And that's why we've seen a collapse of trust in democracies. Here what we see is there is no democracy in the blue color. In the general population, for the first time in 20 years that we've been doing this study, not a single democracy is seen as in trustworthy land. In short, the big losers this year, Germany, Australia, Holland, South Korea, the US. The US is the saddest story of all over the decade, dropping from a solid middle to a bottom 4. 4 of the 5 in the bottom are democracies. Why? It's because developed countries lack economic optimism. Not a single democracy in the developed world believes that its families will be better off in 5 years. That's a deep condemnation of the system. I'm going backwards. I'm afraid. And therefore, I question capitalism. More people question the validity of capitalism today than ever before. More than half of our respondents say it does more harm than good, and a full 1/3 believe centrally managed economies do a better job than free market economies. This is a very important slide. The people of China have a deep trust in their institutions. In contrast, America and Americans have a low trust in their institutions. This is the widest gap we've ever seen in trust between the two countries. The biggest gap is actually in government. The Chinese believe in their government, the Americans don't. And there's very little difference between the institutions in China, but I want you to see that there are relatively large gaps between institutions in the US, 10 points or more. Now, also important to say, brand China is at an all-time low. If you're a company that's a Chinese company wearing that flag into the game, you only have 31% trust. If you're wearing the American flag on your jersey, you have 53% trust. Again, a solid middle. We believe that societal leadership is now a core business function. I'm going to try to prove this case. All stakeholders, from consumers to employees to investors, now hold business accountable for societal issues. I'm a belief-driven buyer, 60%. I'll only buy brands that advocate for my beliefs. I'm a belief-driven employee, 60%. I will only work at Allianz if I believe in what Oliver is doing. I'm also, as an institutional investor, 88% say I put ESG at the same level as financial performance or operational excellence in buying shares. This is a major change in money markets. Again, I want to reiterate the centrality of the thesis, my employer. My employer is 16 points higher than business in general. My employer is universally trusted around the world. Trust is local, therefore responsibility to speak up. A shocker. My employer media, for the second year in a row, is the most trusted source of information. Again, whether it's about the pandemic, whether it's about reskilling, this channel is not seen as politicized. It is seen as honest and therefore something I can believe, in contrast to government, media, or other. CEOs. This is a vital slide also because CEOs are to be seen as the face of change. I, as an employee, want my CEO to speak up. 60% of employees say this about controversial social and political issues that I care about. CEOs to be personally visible when discussing public policy. Now, important distinction. Inform policy, don't influence politics. This is a very fine line about labor practices in China or several other issues. But on jobs in the economy, about technology and automation, about wage inequality, etc. What not to do? Try to help pick who the next leader of the country is. Stay out of politics. How are we going to break this cycle of distrust? Well, here's a way. This is our model. Competence on the x-axis, ethical behavior on the y. We've been following this for years. What's happened is that you've seen government creep down to the bottom left. Business to the top right. NGOs have recovered into also being in the top right. So, business is 53 points more competent than government. A shocking finding. NGOs, the most ethical. Business improved on ethics. Again, if you think about the model sort of like a seesaw at the playground, NGOs and business have to be stabilizing forces for weak performance by media and by government. Over time, to get to stability, we have to get government and media to move closer to the top right. We actually thought this year that we had reached a limit for how much business should be involved on societal issues. We were wrong. Business engagement on societal issues people want more of, not less. 5 times more for climate change, economic inequality, workforce reskilling, and then somewhat less on injustice, only 4 times as much. In short, we want more, not less, of business as the stabilizing force. Why? Because business is effective, but business is also visionary. I want you to note, however, NGOs score very highly here. Business would be smart to do more partnering with civil society, not less. The last few years, it's been a little bit push away. Don't do that. Put the arms around and work with civil society. Cautionary note, fairness. Business scores poorly on fairness. That mass-class divide is partly chalked up to business. A central thesis of the Trust Barometer 2022, good information can help close the societal divide. How do we know this? Because a person who's in that low-income group, who is well-informed, has a 10-point bump in trust in institutions. By contrast, a person who's in the high-income group, who's not well-informed, has a 7-point drop in trust. Our thesis, if you read 3 or 4 news sources a day, if you also check the information with other sources to make sure that it's accurate, you are, in a short, closing the societal divide. You are helping repair society. We find information quality is the most powerful trust builder across institutions. This is not any longer the job of media. It is the job of every institution to support media, to make sure that media is added to. We've had job losses in media. We've had move to polarization. We have to have every institution, from business to government to NGOs, adding to the news flow. We are optimistic for this year. We believe that we can restore trust and thereby get to societal stability. Here are 4 to-dos. Business, the societal role is here to stay. Remember, 5 to 1. People want more of you, not less, on climate or race or upskilling. Second, we have to show that the system works. We have to have tangible progress. We have to be sure that people believe that we can have fair outcomes, that the system can succeed for all. Third, I give business great credit for moving its time horizons to longer-term thinking. Other institutions have to follow suit. We have to have solutions over divisiveness. We have to have long-term thinking over short-term momentary gains. Lastly, it's every institution's job to provide trustworthy information. Clear, concise, easily accessible, fact-based. We've got to break this horrible cycle of distrust. Jillian, with that, I pass it to you. Thank you.